Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to extend a big thank you to Dr. Pooja for inviting me for this session. And another special note of thanks to my mother, Professor Rekha Attri, who you might have interacted with during your tenure at Jaipuria Institute of Management. It's a moment of great pride that I'm getting this opportunity to present in front of you all. So thank you so much to whoever gave a little bit of context as to who I am and where I come from. So this slide basically talks about my entire journey snapshot, and this is also my LinkedIn banner. So it talks about how I did my schooling from Daily College Indore. I lived in Indore for over 10 years, so I have not yet visited campus, unfortunately, but I would love to meet all of you in person as well. I then went on to do my undergraduate degree from Hansraj College, and that's when COVID hit. So I was fortunate enough to complete most of my undergraduate program during non-COVID or pre-COVID years, and then the world came to a standstill. That's when I sort of thought of upskilling myself in the time that I had at home in Indore, and I decided to pursue the integrated program in business analytics from IIM Indore. I had a job offer in hand from United Airlines at this point, but because COVID-19 hit, it impacted me very adversely. Many people, obviously, it was a sad event for humanity, but many people lost their jobs, and I was also one of them. So that was one of the major setbacks in my career, even before it began. I started off in a world where everybody came to a standstill, and I had no job in hand. And I had just graduated from a premier college from Delhi University. So one would wonder, what can a person do when they find themselves in a situation like this? Should they take the easy route? Should they completely forget all the hard work, and should they just sit on their hands and start crying? Well, all of that emotion does come into play, but one has to realize that they have to move forward. And that's my way of moving forward, that I enrolled myself in this business analytics course. After that, United Airlines was where I had secured my campus placement from, and they were lucky enough to reach out to me again. And then I again interviewed with them, and I was fortunate enough to get a job with them. So I spent 2 years working with United Airlines. I'll talk about my experiences more in detail as well. Then I transitioned to Kappa India, which is, as you can say, a very Indian focused aviation consulting firm. And throughout my 3 years, 3.5 years of my career, I've basically worked in the aviation industry. Then I decided that it's time to step up. I need to go for my master's, and I chose UNSW Sydney, which is one of the group of 8 institutions, which is considered one of the prestigious colleges in Australia. I'll talk to you about my journey, and these are some pictures that can sort of represent where I come from and what all I have done in my schooling, because you're yourself in maybe your first or second year of MBA. So this is a little bit relatable to all of you. So that's me. Right out of after COVID ended, I went to collect my degree from Hansraj College. So the first image is that. Then this is the group of friends that I made over the 3 years. I was a very active debater, that is public speaking. I used to love doing parliamentary debates, Model United Nations conferences, quizzing, and all of those things. So that's the image of my society. And I also had a career oriented outlook towards things. So I would help out with internship fairs, placement cell, you name it. So we were featured on the city campus Hindustan Times newspaper as well for that. After all of that, I decided to do a summer internship at Ernst& Young EY in Gurgaon. For 2 months, I used to travel almost 2 hours a day simply to go in the office and do some boring tasks that the internship wanted us to do. But that's part of your learning experience. Every day you're going to go into offices from 9 to 5, probably even 9 to 9, when it comes to the Indian context, work really hard. And these things teach you. So internships definitely have a role to play in what your journey is and how you are shaped. Here's an image of I am Indore. And finally, I have made it to my first job at United Airlines. To give you a bit of context, United Airlines is an American company. It's the largest airline in America and has the most number of aircrafts. Essentially, I worked in a knowledge center. So, what does a knowledge center do? A knowledge center basically is an establishment that is outsourced, so that most of the analytical work would come to our doors in India, while the US teams could also do some of the management related tasks. When I transitioned from a multinational company that had an offshore operation in India, I transitioned into a core Indian company. It couldn't get more Indian than this. At my next stint at CAPA India, which is the Center for Asia Pacific Aviation India, I was working very closely with the government of India and the Ministry of Aviation. And then I got a chance to experience and explore the various levels of ministries and other clients that were airlines, airports, and try to understand how does Indian aviation work. Mind you, aviation happened by luck, but I fell in love with aviation and I've stuck with aviation ever since. In the flagship event that we organized, we had Honorable Minister of Civil Aviation, Shri Jyotiraditya Scindia ji, also present, and it was great interacting with him after the session. It is these small milestone markers that shape who I am today, and I'll talk about more about them in detail. And here's the image of UNSW Business School where I completed my master's from my alma mater. So finally, let's dive into the session. What are the three crucial lessons that one must learn in the course of their life towards building a global career? First, I would like to clarify what a global career is. A global career isn't simply when you start working in New York or start working in London. A global career can begin today. A global career can be a stepping stone where you're interning with, let's say, a company that's not based in India, where you're working in a multinational corporation which has operations elsewhere, but most of its work is coming to India. Global teams are also part of a global career. The power of diverse skills also becomes really important as a lesson, because when you're building a global career, you don't need to only have good Excel skills or good PowerPoint skills. You also need to have great communication skills. So we'll talk about the power of diverse skills in a bit. The importance of international exposure is also really important. We cannot live in a well where we don't know what's happening around the world. One must be aware of what's happening in, let's say, Ukraine versus Russia, what's happening to the economic markets, where is China headed, where is Australia headed. These sort of things are really important, and one must pay cautious attention to it. And trust me, I know it. I'm a Gen Z as well. Most of my time in the day is spent scrolling through LinkedIn or Instagram reels. So we need to be aware of the international exposure that we're exposed to and try to create an atmosphere where we're continuously enriching ourselves. Thus, our third major lesson is a need for continuous learning. And now the picture that you see on your right is not just a random bunch of towers in a fancy location. It's actually the offices of the big four consulting firms in Sydney. That's the view you get when you get off Opera House and you see what your future workplace can look like. And trust me, it's not something that's a far-fetched imagination. It can be very real. It's just small steps that you need to take to transition into a global career. So, why did I make the leap from Indore to Sydney? What made me motivated to actually travel all the way, 16 hours away from home? Well, for me, this is another stepping stone. I'm not too sure if I'm going to be staying in Sydney for all my life, but this is one of the milestones that I see in my own career. So that gives us another lesson that we should not keep our eyes very fixed on the long term. Sometimes a medium to short term goal can also be a good stepping stone or a ladder which you can reach the heights. So exploring global and diverse perspectives was really important for me as an individual. And these international roles offer much more professional challenges and personal growth opportunities. Whenever we get very proud that Rishi Sunak has become the Prime Minister of England, of UK, or we get proud when we hear the names of Indra Nui, Satya Nadella, or Sundar Pichai, they're all Indian origin. Most of their stories began in India. So it's not a far-fetched reality for any one of you. You can also actualize your dreams and make it globally. A few context images. In UNSW Sydney, they teach us a course called Australia Business Essentials, which talks about how can you actually integrate yourselves into the Australian economy, into the Australian workplace. So one of the activities that they make us do is collect trash on the beaches in Sydney, which are very world famous and known to be cleanest. We come from Indore, which is the cleanest city in India. But when you look at the beaches in Sydney, I was struggling to find any waste to pick. So that's the kind of difference and the difference in perspective and experiences that you actually realize when you travel internationally, when you live and work internationally. So today's themes are going to be around four major topics, and I'm going to structure them in the same way. The first theme that we're talking about is navigating international environments. You meet a lot of friends, and these are a bunch of my friends that were exchange students that came from Norway, and we did kayaking. As you can see in the background, slightly you can see the Sydney Harbour Bridge as well. Overcoming challenges is also a very crucial lesson for today. Gaining experience, trying to present yourself in the best and most formal way is another theme that it takes to go global. Developing resilience is the story of any international student who leaves their home and goes for an international journey towards a global career. So we'll talk about developing resilience as well. So here's the first lesson or the first real thought-provoking question that I have for you today. What do you associate yourselves in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see yourself as a consultant? Do you see yourself as a chief accountant? Do you see yourself as a marketing manager? Or do you see yourself simply working in the luxury marketing space? Do you see yourself working in the aviation industry? For me, it was pretty clear that I wanted to work in the aviation industry, no matter what. I wanted to be either a consultant, I could even do finance. I wasn't sure if I could do marketing or loyalty programs, but it was very clear in my head that I only wanted to work with the aviation industry. Why? It was a childhood dream, and I was lucky enough to be pushed into a career that started with United Airlines and Kappa India. So for you, those of you who are unsure whether I will be a good HR manager, whether I'll be a good CFO of a company someday, you have to make that distinction. And sometimes life will make that distinction for you. Tomorrow, you may be starting off as business development executives, you may be starting as account managers, as sales executives. But you need to keep an eye for the story that you are building for yourselves. Because in the past 5 years, whatever I have done, it all adds up to a story. And I encourage all of you to start thinking of a story of your own. Where is it did you start, and where is it that you are today? If I had a passion for music and I started working with a music label and then became a music producer, the story adds up. But if yesterday I was, let's say, driving aircrafts and tomorrow I'm switching to becoming a lawyer, that story is an exception. It's not the norm. So one must very carefully craft what they're after. Are they after a job role that they're very comfortable with, have seen their parents do? Let's say my mom's a professor, so maybe I would like to be a professor in the future as well. So how does that story tie up is also really interesting, and you must give some thought to it. I see many of the graduates of today very interested in sports marketing, and people want to get into sports media and entertainment. So that's an industry choice. When you look at a job role, that can be also very detailed. So I'd request you to all give some thought as to where you're headed. Finally, the distinction between international and domestic roles. As I've said before, your global career can start from this moment. You can pick up a global virtual internship. There are many people in India who are earning in US dollars simply by working remotely. And you could be one of those people if that work style suits you. For me personally, I love going into the office and I love having some hybrid level of work. I don't want to be in a completely remote setup. And I hate the fact that I have to present this virtually. And I would have loved to be there in person and actually have a one on one chat with you afterwards this session as well. Moving on, how does one actually start with these steps? So there's a mix of hard skills and soft skills. And I know this is a very boring kind of jargony kind of thing that I'm saying, where hard skills must be developed. Everybody knows hard skills are necessary. But having lived in Sydney for so long, I've realized that there are certain key skills that this industry is after, or let's say the developed countries are after. First thing is developing proficient analytical skills. And I add a note of caution. Don't be misled. This does not mean that everybody has to be a data scientist. Analytics can be very simply understood as trying to use data in the best way possible. Now, a data scientist can also do it, but a business owner who probably doesn't even know what Python, SQL, or R is can also do a decent level of analytics using core tools like Excel and PowerPoint. Clive Robert Humby is considered the father of analytics, modern day analytics. He's a British chap, and he says, and this word is very famous now, data is the new oil. But I see a lot of graduates getting misled by the fact that analytics is the future, analytics is everything. Sure, yes. But if we go back to the discussion of industry versus job role, there are many other job roles that necessarily are not tech specific, but require a lot of analytics. So that's my 2 cents on this. Understanding global trends is also really important. And learning cross cultural management practices is something that, as an MBA graduate, you must be well equipped with. And I feel Jaipuria Institute would also have certain levels of interactions with this guest lecture, for instance, can help build an understanding of how cross cultural management works. And I believe you'd all be learning in classroom Hofstede's model, Globe, Trompinars, all of these models of cross cultural frameworks. what does Melinda Gates say? So she talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And why I've included this as a hard skill is because the West and the developed countries that people think of starting their careers in, let's say UK or USA, Canada, Australia, most of these countries have very much a system where they want diversity, equity, and inclusion. This means not only looking at it from a very functional perspective, but including elements of diversity as well. Sustainability is the key highlight for me in this slide, because I feel most of the hard skills that we train towards are, let's say, analytics or Excel, but there's a vast plethora of courses and studies around sustainability. If you notice any of the accounting reports that most of our big companies in India also are producing, there is a two-pager on how they're making sustainability a reality in their own respective businesses. So I feel sustainability is really going to pick up in India as well. And that's a starting point for all of you. So I urge you to try to explore sustainability and put it in your own interesting spin and see how you can come across as sustainable leaders. Let's talk about soft skills. Now, here I tried to make it very meme related because all of us are probably Gen Zs. So you must have seen this meme of Bear Grylls saying improvise, adapt, and overcome. But those are the key mantras to adaptability in the global environment as well. One must improvise. They must come up with innovative ways to keep the conversation going. In India, what I've observed is we love having chats. We love having long discussions and talk about work later. But here, or in the West, if I could say, people prefer very short small talk and they come back to work very quickly. So creating those conversations is also a key skill that you'll have to pick up. That's why you'll have to improvise. You'll have to try to work on your communication skills to try to come up with adapting and how you can sort of mix things together. Cultural sensitivity is also really important. One agrees that India is a very culturally diverse country, but not many people outside India know that. We have so many regions. We have the north, south, east, and west. We have central India, all with which have a great cultural diversity. But people abroad don't know that. They think Indians are all the same. So it's our role when we go into global careers to create that sense of cultural sensitivity and mix with other cultures as well. On the bottom left, you can see the mountain man Manji, which is, I believe, a motivator for all of us, that with resilience, we can overcome any challenge with perseverance. Also, it's not always about English. 90% of your communication is nonverbal. That includes your tonality, your hand gestures, and how deeply you are making eye contact with the person. So those kind of things you should start practicing in your daily life as well, because people who are from global teams, a person who's your, let's say, a manager, will look at those things and try to understand you, because your English and their English is very different. And I face that challenge as well. So delivering a clear and concise message is becoming really important in today's day and age. I have an interesting case for you. So let's say you are an Indian employee who's hired by a German company and you are working with them. So the German manager simply comes to you and says, what can be done to make sure that this project is completed on time? As an Indian employee who is in a new environment, you don't know what to say. You don't want to be too forward and you don't want to make a mistake. So you simply say, I don't know. What do you suggest? It's like our way of asking them what can be done. And then the German employer says, you know, the scheduling and staffing situation here much better than me. So who am I to tell you? You should be coming up with those suggestions. So this is where cross-cultural communication also plays a big role. One must understand who they are talking to. Because as an Indian employee who's working with a German manager, my thoughts would be, he's the boss. Why the hell is he asking me these questions? I simply asked him for instructions. I just came here. I don't know how this world works. So they should just give me the instructions clear and straightforward. What kind of manager is he? Well, does he expect me to say something? So those kind of things are what goes on in the mind of an Indian employee who's faced in this situation. But the German manager may be thinking, well, I'm trying to actually give him some responsibility. I'm trying to make sure that he can take that responsibility. I want to train him so that he can make some better decisions. So understanding the cultural nuances of the country or the people that you're working with becomes really, really important. So my tips or my mantra for this suggestion would be expressing clearly across cultures, practicing active listening for better understanding. Now, here's a very interesting exercise on what active listening is. Let's say Dr. Pooja says something in class and you haven't been paying attention. The easiest thing to do is to just repeat what Dr. Pooja said and try to give an interesting spin on it and try to understand what she's trying to say. So active listening comes from repeating your ideas and trying to build that idea again. Your communication style must fit the audience as well. I know everybody might not be comfortable with Hindi, but I'll probably throw in some anecdotes in Hindi as well so that it relates better with you guys. Finally, non-verbal cues matter as well, your body language, your posture, and your tonality. So this graph that you're seeing, I know it's a little confusing, but this is just an extension of the previous slide. So a German manager, as you can see, is somewhere in the bottom right. They're very hierarchical, but they're also very consensual. What that means is they will give you orders, they'll hold you with a stick, but they'll also ask you on your suggestions. Countries like Saudi Arabia, India, Russia to an extent are more top down and hierarchical. So if I, as an Indian, am moving to, let's say, United States or United Kingdom, I know it's still going to be top down. There's still going to be a manager and there's still going to be a subordinate. But it's going to be more egalitarian. They're going to ask your opinions. It's going to be an equal kind of structure. And this is very common in today's startups. And the culture of not calling a person sir is also very common in the West. Nobody calls each other sir or ma'am. And that's something that even happened in my experience at United Airlines. My manager, who was 20 years more senior to me, told me to call him by his name. It was very strange for me because even in college, we were asked by our hostel seniors to call us sir. So that's a cultural shift that you will be experiencing. Even in your workplace, when you go, it's very easy to pick on these things in the first week, whether to address the person by their first name or their last name or by sir or ma'am, also depends on context. Finally, I want to talk about next. I want to talk about this idea of networking strategies and building connections. Because how does one actually start knocking on those doors for global opportunities? It's not like people suddenly have to travel all the way to Canada to land a job in Canada, right? There are many people in your family, in your friends, acquaintances that you know that got a job offer in Middle East, in let's say Australia, in Canada, and they simply migrated there. So how does that happen? You're certainly not meeting these people in Vijayanagar, right? You're meeting them over LinkedIn. So in LinkedIn, the strategy that you need to apply is trying to upskill yourself while putting all that content on LinkedIn. So I'll talk about it in a little bit in the next slide. But the image that you see on your top right is essentially I got an opportunity to host a panel discussion, and I didn't even know what the topic was about. But I was just given a prompt, and I was told host the panel discussion. We know you'll be able to manage it. So that comes with the idea of adaptability and overcoming, and the idea of resilience as well. Because I was shaking, I didn't know what to do, I didn't know what to say, but you're thrown in that environment, and I networked with them, and it really led to great outcomes. And if you're wondering, well, how can I learn networking? How can I learn the LinkedIn way of networking? The idea is you go to LinkedIn, there's a learning platform that they have, and LinkedIn Learning has this AI enabled feature now where you can write anything you want to learn, and it gives you a curated list of the top four courses that you can take on LinkedIn. So I did this for this presentation as well. I just went to LinkedIn Learning, I typed in networking, and it gave me these four courses that you need to take. And probably I need to take these courses as well because I'm also on that journey with you guys. I'm with you, and I'm in the same boat. I'll also have to network to gain meaningful employment in the country. So engaging meaningfully on LinkedIn and other platforms is really important. Attending industry events and conferences. If you get the opportunity to represent your college, I know Jaipuria is a big event that Jaipuria organizes. So try to participate in that event. Try to show your active participation. Try to fight for leaders for positions of responsibility, because that competitive spirit is what these recruiters are looking for. They're looking for that fire in you. And finally, I want to talk about mutually beneficial relationships. Now, you may ask, Ankit, why are you giving so much gyan? Why don't you tell us the exact mantra to succeed? Well, the answer isn't that simple. Even if I had to network to a person who is 10 years senior to me working in aviation and I wanted to secure a job in their company, I would try to show that even I will add value to the conversation. I can't simply go to LinkedIn and type, "Mujhe job de do," or tell them that, please give me an internship. It doesn't work that way. They get thousands of messages just like yours. So it's really important to stand out. There is a very creative way of putting your story across, of putting your main pointers across, and trying to build a mutually beneficial relationship. I won't go on harping about networking because you can take these courses and gain most of these insights. and we'll come back to the topic of building a global career opportunity. So, as I said earlier, the pursuing the lifelong learning is something that needs to be really central to what you guys are doing. As MBA students, you have the time to take on some additional courses, maybe Excel certifications, maybe business intelligence for consultants if you're trying to become a consultant right after graduating. And the main story that you want to tell, which ties everything together, is post it on LinkedIn. Don't just do a course for the certificate. Try to create, try to go with the mindset that, hey, I'm taking a course, but now I need to write a LinkedIn post summarizing what I learned. And I know ChatGPT can do a good job in summarizing stuff for you. And I know that academics are having a lot of problem with the use of ChatGPT, but this is the good use of ChatGPT, I would say. Try to summarize the learnings and try to use all of that as a fodder for your LinkedIn feed. Start developing that because that's the first way you can knock the doors on any global opportunity. So one may ask, okay, what's the clear pathway to an international career? I have knocked on the doors on LinkedIn. I've tried to get an internship. There wasn't a lot of success. But I would say don't stop your hunt there. People move internationally across geographies at many stages of their career. It's not like you've missed the bus if you've not gone for a master's abroad. It's great that you're studying your MBA in Jaipuria Institute of Management because it's a great stepping stone for you. Just like Hansraj or IIM Indore was a stepping stone for me. Everybody has their own sort of journey that they have to carve, but you are going to make leaps after you graduate from here. So, what is it that you really need to do to create that journey for yourself? What if your first job is just in a city like Pune, which doesn't have a lot of international people, let's say? But the idea is that if you're working for a big brand, you might have multinational teams. You might have teams that are being managed out of Shanghai or Tokyo. You might have a manager who probably is sitting all the way in Argentina and you're reporting to him. So those sort of ideas are when you engage in a company which is a big brand and is a multinational. And then when you work your way, you may get many opportunities to go for projects, etc. as well. Short-term and long-term assignments may also come your way. But those are still things that are going to happen in the future. Today's date, there are multiple case study competitions, internships that are offered remotely. And I know there is Dare to Compete, which is, I think, inside IIM now, which is a platform where you have a lot of case study competitions in India, but there are many such competitions which are also global. So think of it this way. Don't restrict yourself to just Indian competitions. Why not apply to a case study competition in Sweden or Denmark or Germany? You may become a finalist, and then that becomes a highlight for your CV. So those are the ideas that you need to expand your horizon. Think beyond Indore, think beyond Madhya Pradesh, think beyond India, think globally. So here's a QR code that you can scan, which I'll talk to you briefly about. It's the Australian Mates Scheme. This ties into the idea of how you need to be aware of what's happening around in the world. The Australian Mate Scheme, mate is something that you call a friend or a buddy in Australian slang. So the Australian Mate Scheme essentially is facilitating the mobility of Indian early career professionals. So what the Australian government wants is they want you, they genuinely want you to come to Australia and start working. But what are the steps? There is always a terms and conditions applied. So I request you all to just scan this QR code and check it out for yourselves. If you're trying to build a career internationally, check out Australia today. Do your research. Maybe the next week you actually have some avenues where you think of Australia as a really lucrative market for you. That being said, in my first experience at UNSW Business School, I had the opportunity of studying data literacy for business, which was basically an advanced Excel course in the business school. And with that was a company partnership. Now, the company partnership was by PwC, and across a cohort of over 500 students, we had the top performers were chosen to form a team for a global sandbox distribution project. And we were selected. We performed really well. The group that you see on the top right, that's my professor in the middle. And the group of people, we were selected and we went to the PwC office that you saw on the first slide. And we went and presented our insights. And I hope to stay in touch with them to secure an internship as well, maybe. But all of those learning journeys I put on LinkedIn to make sure that even an EY consultant, even a Deloitte recruiting team sees that I am one of those candidates that made it. I am one of those candidates that came to PwC all the way and then presented my insights. So that boosts my ranking in the overall candidates field. So those are the kind of steps you need to start thinking of those things when you're trying to make it in the global career domain. So when we talk about my experience with global teams, I worked from India with a US-based team. My first manager was named Tommy Wong. He was from China. He was the first generation immigrant from China who settled in the United States of America. So he and I would have a lot of chat about what is it like living in the United States as opposed to living in China. And I would share many stories of how it is celebrating festivals like Dashera or Diwali in India. And he kept saying that I would love to come to India. I would love to visit. And unfortunately, I had moved on from United Airlines before I could sort of meet him. But the challenge was working in flexible time zones. As you know, US, Chicago especially, is 11 and a half, 12 hours, completely polar opposite. Very little time to actually talk to my own manager. Sometimes I would only talk to my manager once in a fortnight. That wasn't very healthy for me as I look back to start off my career with. Because if I'm working in a multinational corporation, I would love to talk to more people. I would like my manager to keep giving me feedback. But with that, I learned a very critical skill. How is it that you can make adjustments and they can make adjustments so that we can come together on a mutually agreed time and have those discussions? It reminds me of Harry Potter saying, Albus Dumbledore told Harry Potter and Ron and I think Ginny Weasley that help will be given to those who ask. And that's why when Harry was in need of the sword of Gryffindor, it actually appeared. So one must be not scared to ask for help. But that's a caveat because one can't expect that help will be given. You have to be proactive when you want to ask for help as well. So navigating these cultural differences was something that I learned at United. And I was providing insights to global stakeholders. Because of working with a big company like United Airlines, it really opened my horizons to not only the US or the Indian equation, but also Europe. Because in the airport operations team, when I was working on analytics, we were not only solving problems for India or US, we were also solving problems for Latin America and for other regions as well. When we move forward, the next idea that I want to discuss is timing your move. And this again goes to the idea that you can start today. The crux of this session, I think, is going to be for me is to start as soon as possible because you can't miss on those precious days which can be spent networking and spent on building your successful career ladder. So, when once you've decided what industry you want to focus, what job role you want to prioritize, it's really important aligning those international moves with your career goals. Considering career stages, early, mid, senior, let me give you an insight. What if I spent most of my initial uh, career years in India? I started my family, and now I'm a mid-career professional in India. Would it be wise for me to start an early career role in Australia just because the pay is good? Probably not. I will have other things to consider. I'll have my family, I'll have probably kids, and if I'm a senior level executive, I'll have health related concerns as well. So one must really time their move to a country that is not their own. You have to also evaluate your own personal readiness and circumstances. And these professional networks can be always leveraged for opportunities. What are these personal considerations? Cultural adaptability. I used to be very fascinated with the idea of moving to China. But when I realized that the language is something that will be a big barrier, it wasn't a cultural adaptable fit for me. So I decided to change my opinion and change my stance on that. A support system is also very necessary. And I know many of you would have relatives already well settled in Canada, US, UK, Australia as well. So that support system is also very necessary. Somebody to ask you if you're doing okay is really a big motivator, especially when you're making a move and moving abroad. Emotional readiness is also a big factor. I don't usually cry, but the day I was saying goodbye to my mom and dad and moving to Australia and I took the flight, I teared up. And I didn't expect that I would probably tear up. So, emotional readiness is also really important when you make these decisions. Your savings and budget also comes to play. What if you accepted a job offer and they're asking you to move to Canada, but you only have X amount of money in your own savings? It's not like the company is giving you an all expense paid full free ride to come to Canada and start working. You'll have to consider other things. You'll have to think about visa conditions. You'll have to think about many things that are monetary. You'll have to look at the taxation system. Many of my previous colleagues have now made their move in the aviation sector to Saudi Arabia, where the taxation system is very beneficial and many people are very happy with the pay they are getting. But then other things also come into play. Cost of living is another big thing that is really a crisis all across the world. And this comes from the fact that you need to be aware of what's happening around you. Europe, USA, Canada, you name it. Everybody has a housing shortage. They're not building enough homes for people, and immigration is at an all-time high. So probably at this moment, considering a permanent relocation isn't the best idea. But there are other alternatives that you can look at. What is the job security and growth that you're going to get in these new roles? What is the work visa and legal requirements? And how relevant are your skills over there? Let's say I'm a supply chain manager who's done an MBA from Jaipuria Institute of Management, and I know the ins and outs of how a factory floor works in an Indian context. But what if your machines were obsolete 10 years ago in Australia? What will you do then? How will you adapt? Will your skills be even relevant? That leads me to an important point that I wanted to mention earlier on upskilling. Unfortunately, it's the reality that most of the skills that are in demand globally reach India very late. And that's the thing that I've realized. The cryptocurrency bubble was probably 5 years before it was there in the US, and then it came to India and everybody started working on it. So, as an early bird advantage, if anybody is considering entrepreneurship, research on these global things that are happening is really very important. The NFT thing happened and it came to India very late. So somehow even Tableau, Spotfire, all these Power BI tools, many of the American companies had fully adopted these systems, and Indian companies were unaware that any of such softwares can also be used. So I feel you have to constantly be on the lookout for such softwares and technologies that the West is using. And unfortunately, that's the reality of today's times. I'm not saying become completely subservient to the West, but learn from where they're succeeding. There are also practical considerations like healthcare and insurance, housing, transportation, and your long term planning, your career progression, your PR or citizenship. Also, by all this time, many of you may have already made your mind. मुझे तो इंडिया में ही रहना है, मुझे तो बाहर नहीं जाना है. I want to continue staying in India. There's no place better than India, and I agree with you. I would love to come back home and create a successful career for myself in India. But truth be told, even at the higher levels of Indian organizations, they require some level of global exposure because Indian companies are exposed to the world. It's not like we are in North Korea, which is self sufficient and completely cut off from the world. We interact with Americans, with the Germans, you name it. With every country, we have good relations, and we were the G20 president as well. So all of those things, it's a very geopolitically kind of active country we live in, and we're poised to be the strongest economy, and we probably are on the path to that. So some of these myths must be dispelled. It's not like you can simply look at your horizon and keep focused on India. I feel for my personal opinion comes in here is I want to explore the world. I want to see what's happening in Australia. I want to see what's happening in Europe and build those findings and bring it back to India. I want to come back, but that's not the point of this session. The point of this session is to keep that global mindset. It's to keep that open mindedness that you need to think from a global perspective, not just look at what's happening in India and how do I be the best in India. So the first myth that I want to talk about is that these international roles always require relocation. And I think COVID pandemic has changed that myth completely because as I spoke before, there are many people I know, even in my network, that are earning in US dollars or Australian dollars and are enjoying a very comfortable life in cities like Indore as well. So that can be a possibility. But you must complete all the steps to create an opportunity for you like that. It's not going to be like the placement cell is going to suddenly bring American companies into Jaipuria Institute of Management's placement roster, right? You'll have to do that effort on your own. You'll have to do that effort towards your mid-career. So international roles don't always require relocation. There are many other opportunities where you can do remote work as well. One myth that I have heard many times is you need to be fluent in multiple languages. Now, I feel that's sort of a statement that's true for Europe and like other Latin American countries. But I feel the role of communication and functional business communication level of English is also really important. Once you gain a command over English and you can gain a complete analytically sound understanding of how English language works in the workplace, that's when you can probably look at other languages. So I would say try to focus on English as a strength first and then pivot to any other secondary language. Another myth that I've heard is that this is only for experienced professionals. Early career professionals don't get a foot inside the door. That's true to an extent. Most of these countries have immigration processes that require you to have X number of years of work experience before you can consider moving abroad. But as I said, what about the mate scheme then? Australia is inviting early career professionals, and there is a skilled occupation list under which there are certain professions that need to be prioritized because there's a shortage here. They don't have enough people here. There's a trend of people just doing undergraduate level studies and starting work. There's a tradie culture here. People like to be plumbers, electricians, and there's nothing wrong in that. But they don't want to do an MBA. They just don't want to do a master's degree. So they require immigration for those highly skilled roles. So one can leverage this opportunity to tap onto these opportunities that exist in the global framework. And if you're interested in trying to debunk your own myths, if there's something that I've not covered and you feel is true, I'd request you to scan this QR code, because this will take you to a website of all the frequently asked questions that are myths that you think are true. हमें तो लगता है ऐसे ही होता है. So you go to these websites and try to explore, what is it really living like in Canada? What is it really living in Australia like? Staying in India, as I also said, it's a beautiful country we have here. And the idea of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam comes to my mind. In the G20 presidency, the theme was Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. It means that this world is a one big giant family. And that is the idea that really should be highlighted in this session, because I feel with the global mindset, nowhere is far in today's day and age. You can reach Antarctica on a 24-hour flight with a few layovers. What I'm trying to say is that the world is getting smaller and smaller, and this is something that we've been hearing for the longest time. But as an aviation professional, I can attest to that, because the new age aircrafts will make travel time much more quicker. So idea is to look at the world as a large, big family, and staying in India also has multiple advantages, but with a global mindset. Multinational offices, export-oriented industries, global delivery centers or shared services are already existing in India. You probably might be working in a foreign-run country, a foreign-run company, and probably not even know about it. So those are the kind of ideas and companies that are existing in India today. And these consulting firms also offer a lot of international client exposure. And I'd add a note about my experience with Kappa India here as well. So most of you would know that there are only two or three major aircraft manufacturers. One is Boeing and one is Airbus. Airbus is from France and Boeing is from USA. So if Indigo or Air India, which had their largest single order purchase of aircrafts, the French employees from Airbus had to fly in. They came to Gurgaon and they had to sit and negotiate with these Indigo managers. Indigo is a pure Indian company, but they have exposure to these international markets by virtue of being an airline. So aviation as an industry also appealed and fascinated me, because you have a lot of these global representatives coming in. And same for Boeing. Boeing had US employees come into India and fly in and to negotiate these contracts so that they can sell these aircrafts. So who is to say tomorrow there's going to be and there's a fun fact that I want to tell you as well. There is many automobile and car manufacturers in Australia, but one of them is Mahindra and Mahindra. Mahindra and Mahindra has two dealerships in Sydney. Now this seems like it's something that we can't even imagine. कौन सोचता है? But they have their dealership, they have an outreach here, they are actively marketing their products. So the world is continuously becoming smaller and smaller, and no matter how much you resist it, the globalization is truly going to hit our generation of workers. So I want to give a little bit of targeted insights into the skilled occupations that are in demand. So if you scan this QR code, you can at least get to know that in Australia, what are some of the skilled occupations that they're looking for. For instance, they're looking for project managers in real estate and construction. They're looking for a lot of medical professionals. Now, necessarily, if you're doing an MBA, this may not make sense to you. So there are some accounting rules. If you already have a few papers of CA cleared, there is a certain skilled occupation that is in demand, and you can straight away make your entry into Australia. So those are the things that you need to be aware of if you're looking at a global career opportunity. So here's a list of high demand fields. To the left, I've added a few fields that in conversation I've heard people pursuing masters in. And these are the skills that probably if you have a science background or a STEM major and are now doing your MBA, these are the skills that may excite you. For a person like me who did, let's say, commerce and economics, finance and banking roles in the global market are something that appeal to me. Niche consulting projects, international digital global marketing, supply chain, entrepreneurship, etc. So I've already highlighted this before, and I'd still continue to highlight so, is a benefit of working with big brands. And there are a few lessons that I've learned. If you start working with a big brand, you gain exposure to the global best practices. There's a diverse work culture and teams that you interact with. There's many more opportunities for career advancement. And to an extent, because I've worked with an Indian company and a multinational company, I can tell you that the career advancement in your structured large MNCs uh, is much more clear. There is no bureaucracy in it. There's access to extensive training and development. So even in your initial years, the company will pay you and they will give you certain vouchers to get trainings and upskill yourself. And finally, you can build a strong global professional network. As I told you, Tommy Wong was my first manager. And whenever I'm in Chicago, he would invite me with open arms, I hope. And I would love to meet him. So that's the sort of professional network you develop when you start working with these multinational corporations. So you can do that comparison for yourself in terms of whether you'd like to work with an Indian company or an international company. So you need to ask yourself a few questions. Which company type aligns with my career goals? And why is that? Why do I say that? These innovation hubs that really come up. You might have heard Israel is a big innovation hub for drones. So where is this disruption happening? Where is this technology coming from? Why is one certain country innovating more than the other? Because they prioritize their resources towards there. So for me as well, Asia Pacific was the region where I explored aviation, and Sydney had Qantas Airlines, which is one of the biggest in the Asia Pacific region after Singapore Airlines. So for me, the disruption has already happened. So that's why I wanted to move to a Asia Pacific centered master so that I can learn this innovation. And in terms of entrepreneurship, what would be the challenges from one setup to the another? Because Mahindra and Mahindra also took years. They've been active for so long and they took years to transition into a market like Sydney. So what is it that you can leverage? And do you see yourself being a startup owner? So all of those things come into play when you're looking at going global. Finally, I've come to the last slide of my session. I know there's a lot of things to take into, and I hope I've not bored you. And I've added a few images to keep you all intrigued into the slides. The final thing that I'd want to talk about is building resilience in global careers, because resilience is really important. We talked about Manji, the mountain man, but there's also the aspect of adapting to cultural adjustments and new environments, overcoming these communication barriers effectively, managing these time zones and your work life boundaries, cultivating a strong support network, prioritizing self care and mindfulness practices. There's a Japanese saying which is fall 7 times, but stand up 8. That means you fall 7 times, but you have to have the courage to stand up the 8th time. So finally, I'd like to take this session to a close. That's the photo of me trying out surfing for the first time in Sydney. And that's the QR code to scan for the Headspace app, which I use quite often when there's stressful exam season or I'm going into a session like this where I have to speak for an hour at length. So I use this app as well. So I'd request you all to give it a try if you feel like it. And that's my time. Thank you so much for listening to me. Here's a brief session recap. There's diverse skills and continuous learning are crucial. You have to embrace both hard and soft skills, explore international opportunities through strategic timing, debunk your myths because you may run into an understanding that isn't the true picture. So you may uncover something new and balance your resilience with work life. Thank you so much for taking out the time to listen to this session.